Hey everyone, it's the day after the night before. We were watching the Microsoft E3 2021 press briefing. Lots to get through, lots to talk about. Pretty amazing lineup of games, phenomenal array of Game Pass titles. To talk about it, I'm joined by John Linneman.
Hey Rich, yeah, I was streaming it yesterday with Audie and the My Life in Gaming folks. I really enjoyed it. There was a lot of amazing stuff there, including some stuff I'm really excited about, and we're going to talk about that today.
Absolutely, and of course, Alex Battaglia, he's here.
I'm here, got my glass of sparkling water, ready to talk about Halo.
And I've got my bottle of sparkling water.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about. You mentioned Halo, Alex, but I think we're going to start with Forza Horizon.
Yes, yeah.
Which I think was pretty much the highlight of the event overall. And, wow, what can I say? Some pretty phenomenal visuals there. And, John, I'm really interested in your opinion on this.
Playground Games, these guys, definitely one of the best developers that Microsoft has in their stable. And the Forza Horizon series is so good. Forza Horizon 4 is one of the best games, I think, of the last generation, honestly. I love playing that game. And I was genuinely surprised to see that there's a fifth one, like, coming out this year. I mean, I guess it's been 3 years since the last one, but, you know, they've usually done the whole Motorsport Horizon swap-aroo. But clearly, I guess Motorsport, they're spending more time on that, and the Horizon guys were ready. And this time they went with Mexico, and man, the scenery looks just absolutely superb.
Yeah.
And I think the first thing we've seen is, like, this is really, like, showcasing, it is still cross-gen, but I'm actually really curious to see how they're going to pull this off, because the level of detail in the environment is extremely high this time. I mean, it seems like a significant boost over the last couple games.
Yeah, that's what I saw immediately that caught my eye, was essentially the detail of, like, the rocks and the plants on the side of the street, or they showed the shot of the jungle, which was very, very dense. And I think this being cross-gen means that the Xbox One version, which we do have some numbers here because they posted them regarding the game, I think on, like, the Xbox blog or the game announcement blog.
Oh, cool.
Of basically the Xbox One version or One S version targeting 1080p 30, and the Xbox Series X version targeting 4K 30 with a 60 FPS mode with an unknown resolution below that. They didn't announce that yet.
Wait, so
but
the first one, you were talking about Series S, not One S, right?
I'm talking about One S targeting 1080p 30.
The original Xbox One?
Yeah, that's what they're saying.
Wow.
So
okay.
I'm imagining, based upon what we've seen of the Forza Horizon series on PC, that there's going to be some heavy scalability in their game engine here.
That's true.
To turn down a lot of this trackside detail to make the Xbox One version playable at all, and also to give the next gen or current gen version of the Xbox Series X a lot of that extra, detail that you crave at a higher resolution. So that's what I'm seeing right now. But one thing we could really briefly touch on is kind of the ray tracing they showed off there.
Yeah, sure. Talk about it. What we got there.
Essentially, they showed off initially in the first part of the trailer the car in the desert setting, and you can see very obvious kind of off-screen reflections on the car itself and the car reflecting itself in its own body. But then they immediately, and it took us a while after the stream to figure this out until this morning essentially, that they say in Forza Vista, they say ray traced reflections in Forza Vista. And Forza Vista, for those who don't know, it's kind of like the photo mode version of the game.
When you can kind of explore the cars, like click some of the buttons, and it's a nice way to sort of look at the interior and exterior of each car. It is cool, but yeah.
It is very cool. But I guess at the same time that does make me think that they mean, but it doesn't have ray tracing in the gameplay itself, at least on the series consoles, which would be, that would be disappointing. Considering next gen or this current gen, I always think of, let's put ray tracing into gameplay, but that's maybe a discussion for the future. But I'm a little surprised that if it would really just be limited to the Forza kind of Vista, kind of looking at your car kind of gameplay, and not the gameplay of racing cars.
I think we don't really know the status of this title in terms of where it sits in the generations. So I'm kind of assuming that the next Forza Motorsport title is probably going to be next gen only. And this is a cross-gen title. So, where does it sit within the R&D effort that's going on between Turn 10 and Playground Games? We don't really know. What we do know is that the level of detail that's going on here, the weather effects, the volumetrics, just the photogrammetry quality of those assets.
Yeah, that volcano area, that was awesome.
It's incredible. I mean, it really is phenomenal. And funnily enough, Alex, you were talking about those resolution metrics for 1S. You know, I'm just wondering whether it just sits on the old engine, you know.
Oh, that's a good point.
That was 1080p 30. We just don't really know.
And heck, you know, Forza Horizon 2 had a cross-gen version as well. That was on 360 and Xbox One.
That was kind of interesting. That was done by Sumo Digital, and that was based on the Forza Horizon, the original Forza Horizon engine. I didn't think it was as good as the original Forza Horizon. But, you know, there's options here for making this happen. But I would probably suspect that it is just basically running on the old iteration of the engine.
Right. But
it kind of makes sense.
I think we should probably save some more discussion about this, because this looks so good that we've decided to do a standalone video on Forza Horizon 5.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, let's do it.
It's one of the few games we've seen so far that's going to get its own video because it's so awesome.
Yeah.
So,
and they did actually show a fair bit of it, which
did.
I think is
that's key.
Something, that we'll talk about a bit further on in this direct, is just the whole way that they're presenting games here, which didn't really do it for me. I actually think that many of the titles didn't get their kind of time to shine. But we'll talk about that later. I guess we should move on to the next big game. We were so pumped to see it. Halo Infinite.
Actually,
I'm not
Rich,
sure we have seen it.
I was going to say, we could talk about exactly the thing you're saying right now, because I think we were a little bit surprised that they didn't show that much. Because, you know, this kind of felt like this was the time for it to come out and, show what's changed. And I guess, to be fair, I do think it has improved significantly. The initial section shows sort of the more single player, sort of the inside the ring, and you get that nice flyby of the terrain, and then Master Chief floating around through space during a cutscene. And I thought that looked notably better. The material response was improved. A lot of the things that Alex pointed out in his original video, I feel have already been shown to have been addressed here, or at least improved upon. And it's, you know, they're targeting a native 4K 60 game here, so it should look nice and sharp. And Halo itself has always been about that sort of crisp presentation, so I feel like it could work really well here.
There is some doubt, though, as to what we're actually seeing, isn't there? Because, you know, in-engine was kind of flagged up as, you know, this is what this footage is from. We don't actually know if it's real time. We don't know what system it's running on. I think we were noticing some frame drops in the initial part of that.
During the flyby in space.
Which kind of would suggest real time.
Exactly. Just as a reminder, the first Halo Infinite demo that everybody talked about last year, that was actually shown on PC.
Yeah.
So we've never actually, so I don't know, maybe this is running on Series X here, but until possibly now, they hadn't shown the game running on an actual console.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to talk about, because, you know, we don't really ever have a good sense with a lot of these Microsoft showcases what device they're going to be showing it on, always because it involves both the last gen, the current gen, Xbox Series S and X, as well as the PC. And honestly, if I'm a developer and I'm showing off my game, I'd want to show it off in the best. I'd probably always be picking PC there. So it's really hard to tell what we're actually always looking at. One thing I noticed in the trailer that was just kind of sharing screenshots on our internal Slack about is they did announce last year, after Halo was shown off for the first time, that post-launch ray tracing support would be added, and they didn't describe what it would be. You know, you could theorize. I would have wanted to have seen something like global illumination being added in. That could be a pipe dream, but something like reflections might be in there as well. And while watching this trailer, there's 2 points where, or maybe 3 even, where the Master Chief's visor, it's like this yellowed gold visor, pretty, you know, iconic thing as part of the Master Chief, but it tints the color of incoming light onto it to be more yellow-like. And there's a number of moments where the Chief looks at the AI construct, who I think is Cortana, or maybe not Cortana. It was a little hard to understand in the trailer.
No, it wasn't Cortana.
It wasn't? Okay, good.
No.
It was I don't even know. And you can see what looks almost like a semi-static reflection of the standing, you know, character there on the pedestal of the AI there, the hologram. It doesn't really move too much, and it's really hard to tell. There's another part of the trailer where the Master Chief throws off a a dead Marine into the side, kind of like carefully pushes him in a different direction and turns around, and you can see like the hand and the head and the helmet of the Marine reflected back in the Chief's visor. I don't know if this is just trickery or, you know, shadow puppets for a trailer's sake, but those kind of off-screen reflection elements do make me think ray traced reflections. But once again, this is a scripted trailer cinematic sequence. It could be literally like perfect cube maps placed in each location. So it's just thought I would throw that out there. But if this game did have ray traced reflections, that'd be pretty cool.
Given the natural look of it, I think ray traced GI really would have been the most interesting.
I know, that's what I prefer.
But I can see why it maybe isn't here.
So what did you make of the multiplayer footage, John?
Oh yeah, so that actually looked pretty solid, and it's interesting when they showed it during the conference. That video was 30 frames per second for some reason, but then they uploaded another trailer to their channel that was actually 60, which is nice, and they say it'll support up to 120 frames per second, which is also extra nice. And it's a weird one because it still decidedly looks very 343, like in that it's like a different style of multiplayer. I was really hardcore into Halo 1 through 3 multiplayer. It's one of the few multiplayer games I ever really got into. And this looks different still, but also appealing. And one of the things I love about Halo, and I think is still going to be applicable here, is because everybody has a shield system, there's a lot more. It's not just about like getting those instant headshots where everybody's just dying immediately like Call of Duty. It's not just about that. It's more of a rock, paper, scissors kind of thing to it. And so that actually kind of makes me excited to check it out again, I guess. And I like the it still has that sort of like bold shapes with those like very clear kind of like angular designs that Halo is known for, but in a lot of colors, and but it's fitting, I think, for the style of game that it is. So I'm kind of interested to see more of that. And I guess the weird thing is that it's very clearly being marketed as a separate thing. It's a free-to-play multiplayer stuff. They split it up from the campaign in a way that's really like, you know, it's clear that they want this to live as its own thing, which is fine. And that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm really curious, kind of looking at this trailer footage here. The kind of resolutions we'll be seeing when they get into the 120 FPS mode. I mean, these are all things that they haven't announced at all yet, but like what would a Series S version of the multiplayer look like running at 120 hertz?
Probably like Dirt 5 or something, where it was like in the, you know, it was sub 600p at points.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
it gets pretty chunky. And
pretty chunky.
I think having the option for Series S makes sense. And you know, it has the CPU there to handle it. It's really just the GPU isn't quite up to task for that. But I think it's good to have both options. And
for sure.
But I'm sure, you know, on Series X it should be suitably high res enough at 120, I would imagine.
You'd hope
we'll see.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, looking at things sort of a bit more globally, something you said, Alex, earlier, which is that you can afford to show your games in the best possible light on a high-end PC. I will take that 100% over in-engine cinematics and whatnot, because it is actually representative of an experience that is attainable. For Halo, though, I was disappointed to see that they were going for the in-engine route, because we're months away from launch, and Halo is specifically tied to selling consoles. You know, it's a showcase for what your console can do, and if you're not showing it on the console, that is concerning, right?
I think also there, Rich, there's probably is, you know, you got to think about the marketing side. I'm sure there's a lot of caution around this because the reaction to Halo last year was so negative. They're probably coming out and being very careful with what they show, just to ensure that that doesn't happen again. But based on the visuals here, though, I really don't think that there's too much to worry about there. It definitely looks better. So I would have liked to have seen more, but I think this is more than just... I know when you say in-engine teaser, we see a lot of that. And typically I'm not a fan of that either, but this does feel a little bit more like they're actually showing the game with like cinematic angles that were maybe already possible with like the replay functions in Halo games anyway. So it doesn't feel that out of place.
One thing to just point out really quickly before we shuffle off onto another topic is that one of the heavy criticisms of the original Halo Infinite footage there was the amount of pop-in visible just even in standard camera movements. And here, when they initially kind of go out from the like open world fly through there in that one section, there's very little of it, at least in the close camera plane. So that's a very positive improvement. Yeah,
it just feels more solid and like fully constructed in a way, without a lot of like artifacts popping up in the distance like that. So it's an improvement. And like I said, the material response in general, especially those close-ups on the chief armor, I think you kind of described it as Play-Doh-like in the original video, Alex, and they've really managed to get away from that. It definitely looks much, much better.
Yeah, it was one of my initial criticisms, is that everything was I know they wanted it to be this way probably from an aesthetic standpoint, but it was way too clean and lacked a lot of like punch in terms of contrast and specularity, and that looks a lot better now. So
exactly.
So I think we can sort of sum that one up by saying that it's looking promising, and that's great. I just think from my own personal perspective, the time for promise is over and we kind of need to see something delivered. And that's still up in the air, and that's kind of a bit weird. But let's move on to the next title that caught our eyes. I mean, we're not going to be covering all of them. I mean, there was like 30 games. I mean, we'll talk about the sheer density of stuff that they had, which was just phenomenal. And, you know, the whole fact that virtually everything, I think it was 27 titles out of 30, was tied into Game Pass, which is like such a phenomenal statement. But the next title that caught our eyes, Stalker 2, which actually did get an extended, certainly looks real-time presentation. It looks quite phenomenal. So Stalker 2, Alex, there must be some history here, because this game has been teased for many years now, right?
It was announced kind of in a very roundabout way years ago, where they just kind of said, we're working on it. GSC Game World, the company, exists again somehow magically. And it's running on Unreal Engine 4 is what they said back in the day. I presume it's the exact same now. So it's targeting any of that kind of tech in the latest versions of Unreal. And the history here behind this game is, if people don't know, Stalker was released in 2007, I believe, a PC-only shooter, very open world, but not so open world that it was like Far Cry big, but much more constrained in systemic gameplay based upon factions.
It's more of a Deus Ex style experience in that way, where it's like more it's open, but it's within constrained environments, which I actually think is kind of the best approach for this type of game versus like the Far Cry 2 or 3 and up, where it's just like a giant open map. And this is a little more interesting. But the thing about Stalker 1, though, Alex, if you remember, that was also in development for a very, very long time. We saw teasers in like the early 2000s. I remember seeing the normal map tiles and everything and being like, whoa, this looks great. And it took years to come to fruition. But then I guess a lot of those guys ended up leaving to form 4A, is that right?
Yeah, GSC exploded, and then 4A was formed in the Ukraine, and then, well, we know all that history right now. But this is, I'm assuming, a very different team. Maybe there are some veterans on it. I'm not actually sure about that. But it's kind of, the trailer they showed off here was very much so about showing off the moods of the game rather than direct gameplay. I mean, there were moments that were 100% the game is probably going to look like this on a high-end PC, specifically when they show the first-person elements, like the first shootout they show. But most of it was just saying, like, yes, we understand what Stalker is about, you know, like you sitting around a campfire talking. And they did it all in Russian, too, which I think is really good because, you know, this is obviously a Western event, you know, very much so Western focused, and it's pretty hard to get a game in like local language to be shown other than maybe Japanese on a world stage. So I thought that was actually really cool.
We were just talking about that recently, Alex, right? Like about regarding like Metro, where it was like, yeah, the game is a lot better in Russian versus in English with those accents. It just sounds odd. So I was also happy to see that here. But I think we were pretty impressed with a lot of the stuff in display in this trailer. Like you commented earlier on like the hair rendering. But like characters in general, like the facial capture, or like the scene where he's dancing around in like that old gymnasium, you can or stage where, you know, when he actually steps on the different boards, the planks actually move and sync as they go.
That's awesome.
There's a nice attention to detail here with the characters that I think really benefits the game.
Yeah,
the
that's
look.
something that wasn't in the original Stalker at all, too,
No.
because it was so kind of low budget in some aspects. A little, the typical Eastern European jank game from that era in terms of like the way they invested the resources. This is more definitely AAA style, investing in character models. They even showed off a preview a while back where they showed off one of the in-game enemy character models, and they were like, yes, we have it so you can even change the color of his teeth to make them more worn. Like they're going into like intense levels of detail for this game, and you can already see like ray trace reflections in the trailer, really obvious.
Like right when he walks into the door with his gun at the beginning, and like there's all those puddles reflecting, and that covers directly the objects that would have been included if it were screen space. It looks great.
Pretty nice. Ray trace shadows too, I think were pretty obvious to my eye.
Oh yeah, that indoor scene, right, where he's like talking to the guy, and you can see like the bunker. There's like really sharp, beautifully done shadows.
Yeah, really nice stuff there.
With the correct fall off, yeah.
John was so right talking about the character kind of modeling and the hair of the one stranger character that walks right up into the camera. I mean, they'd already announced that I think this game is going to be targeting 30 FPS on Xbox with with the ray tracing. I think this is one of those games that is very much so PC focused effort based upon the original being a PC kind of exclusive, and what we're seeing here will maybe look a little bit different on Xbox regarding resolution or maybe some of the effects we saw. But other than that, I think Stalker has me excited. I do wish to see more real gameplay though, not just these kind of vignettes.
I was actually really taken aback that it was Unreal Engine 4, Alex, because it looked bespoke to me, in so many different respects.
I think that's just a testament to their artists, which kind of like another game that was shown off here as well, Atomic Heart, where you're just so used to seeing Unreal Engine being used for very specific art styles. And I think this kind of more focused on Soviet Eastern aesthetics is what throws us off a little bit. Like it's hard to say.
That's always the thing with Unreal Engine is you can use a lot of their default shaders and other functions with your own art, but a lot of developers can push that so much further, and it's very flexible. I mean, even that was the case with Unreal Engine 3, where there was a lot of games that had the UE3 look because they used a lot of that default stuff. But then you have stuff like Mirror's Edge, which looked really unique, and they had like their own like baked GI solution there, and gave it was cool. So
are you trying to tell me that Black Site Area 51 is not the most original looking video game you've ever seen, John? I don't know.
Black Site Area 51. Oh yeah.
That takes me back. Not to a pleasant place, but it takes me back. Let's move on to the next game, and I think this is actually a personal highlight. Personal highlight, I think, for this particular conference, because the PC original is just so phenomenal, and this did look really good. Apparently captured 4K Series X Flight Simulator, Microsoft Flight Simulator. John, what do you reckon?
So, I mean, this is coming out relatively soon. We've seen this on PC. Alex has covered it a bunch. I've played with it on my PC. It's one of the most stunning examples of rendering right now available publicly, but it focuses on a very different thing. It's more about that creating that sense of scale with like the way they would do the terrain and the buildings and everything is really impressive and gives you a very realistic, natural looking environment. And in that sense, I feel like people might be really surprised to see how good this can look when you're flying around, to the point where this might be the first like real true graphics showcase to hit the Series X when it arrives this summer. Like, this is definitely like a very next gen looking game, if we still want to call it that. It basically looks like something I think this was announced for Xbox One at some point, but I feel like that would not work very well. We know how it runs on the PC, dude. I mean, I just don't see it. Like, maybe a super stripped down version, but like I don't see how they could pull this off on the Xbox One.
I'm also curious about, so I'm pretty sure as part of Xbox Series X certification, and if you're definitely a Microsoft studio, you're going to be pushing the game to run on DX12. That means I presume that there's going to be a DX12 update on PC soon enough.
We were talking about that the other day as well, but I actually think the key benefit here is by designing a console version of this game, hopefully the optimizations made to get it performant on such hardware will roll back into the PC version, which will also increase performance for PC users, because even as is, it's very heavy on the PC.
Oh, it's so heavy. It's that's what I was just about to talk about. It's like at the highest settings, like a 2080 Ti in a lot of scenes is not going to be getting 4K 30. I'll tell you that.
No.
So maybe they're using the high settings, which I found is like a really great optimized, like you can target 4K 30 much more easily on those kind of things. So, I mean, we'll see when it comes out. I'll hopefully be around to cover it. We'll see. Then I'll be talking about what it looks like in comparison to PC, and I think people are gonna be blown away, like John said. This game looked great in the preview, and it's amazing looking on PC right now, and Series X should do it justice.
I'm not really worried about the graphics side of things, to be honest with you. I think there is scalability in that engine, and the Series X GPU is, very, very decent. My concern is the CPU side of things. I mean, I've played a fair bit of Flight Simulator now across. I mean, I played it on a 10900K at 5 gigahertz. You would still stutter at 30 frames per second in complex built-up areas. And it really does detract from the experience, I don't mind running this game at 30 frames per second because it's not an arcade shooter or anything like that. It's all about the spectacle. It's all about the immersion. And what does break that immersion is these massive frame time spikes. You can mitigate it and to a fair degree by not running maxed out at ultra, because the sort of terrain draw is just totally nuts maxed out.
Yeah.
And I think the high setting, the optimized setting, is kind of like half that, and it still looks incredible.
Yeah.
So that's that would be a sort of obvious way forward. But I'm really hoping the CPU side of things is sorted out. I'll tell you what kind of did blow me away though, this notion of a Top Gun expansion. Because this does turn it into what looks like an arcade experience, and it looks phenomenal.
So that actually got me thinking about this. When they first showed this at E3, when they revealed Flight Simulator, I was kind of thinking, like, to take the model of something like this and what they're doing with the engine and turning it more into a, they have Forza Horizon. What if you had, like, Flight Horizon or something, where it's like, not necessarily pilot wings, but, like, take the Forza Horizon model and apply it to a game like this, using this type of visual design, because Flight Sim is really interesting. It's very relaxing, but it doesn't seem like necessarily all the console gamers will be super into it. So I'm curious. I'm actually really curious to watch the reactions to this, because it is ultimately still more of a serious flight game.
Okay, so let's move on to the game that kicked off the entire conference, and I think we called that in our E3 preview, right down to the Todd Howard silhouette. Starfield, which is possibly one of the most eagerly awaited console games. It has now been confirmed, along with a whole bunch of Bethesda stuff, as being Xbox exclusive. You won't be playing this on PlayStation 5. So, Alex, what did you make of this? Because they were flagging the Creation Engine 2. There's new technology here. It certainly looks different to any of the older BGS titles we've seen. What do you reckon?
I think this was a welcome step forward from the usual visual design I've seen, regardless of graphics, the usual visual design I've seen in Bethesda games ever since Oblivion, in terms of the proportions, the way the scene is lit, everything. It honestly didn't look like a Creation Engine game, which was just a positive thing, because we saw Gamebryo evolve into Creation, and then Creation get updated again for Fallout, and it just kind of all had that same visual lineage. And this looked like a pretty clear break, and I think that was, as Rich called it, it didn't look like jank. It looked good, and John and I could talk about it in a second here, but there's also a lot of really great looking rendering stuff going on here. I really, really loved, from a lot of Star Citizen that I've played and enjoyed, the attention to detail in the cockpit, like the individual buttons and little diodes and all these things were modeled out with a really high precision geometric detail, where in a game targeting the last gen consoles, unless it was a cutscene, these kind of things would not at all be rendered out in full. Ever. It would be like textures, usually, with maybe like one or two geometric details. Those are things that stood out to me. I know, John, you can talk a bit about some of the other rendering tech.
Yeah, so I was just watching the trailer again here as we talk, and I noticed they there's this one part where he sort of does something with this locker, and I swear I can't tell if it's a reflection or a transparent glass pane.
Yeah.
You know the part I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think that was a reflection. I think that's the purpose of the shot. I assumed.
Yeah,
right?
There's also at the beginning when they show the ladder there, it looks like potentially we might have ray traced reflections in there, but nothing necessarily occludes it, so I can't really see if there's SSR artifacts. So
yeah, that one's a little hard. There's another one at the end of the trailer when they are closing the ramp to the ship after the thing gets on it, and the underside of the ramp you can see reflections on it.
Yeah,
I know that, and I mean, if it's targeting the release date that it was, which was 11/11/2022, if I recall, yeah. I think ray trace reflections in a game like this makes a lot of sense. And you know, it's kind of hard sci-fi visual aesthetic. We can also talk about I think just once again, it didn't look like a Bethesda game. This makes me really happy because like if you look at the cover art of the game that they showed off already, the key art logo, as well as the just proportions of all these objects, it looks like they're going for a hard sci-fi look. Yep. I like that a lot.
I also liked it a lot. Yeah, everything about it. The granularity on display here, it really is just something that we did not see in previous Creation Engine titles, or really anything Bethesda before that. And I guess the theory we had was, I assume players will spend a lot of time within the ship environment, probably, hopefully, moving between planets. So you would want to ensure that it is of superb quality, because you're going to be looking at it a lot. And it's the same thing like you said in Star Citizen. I mean, the interiors on their ships and the dials and the functions and everything are extremely
high detail,
complex. There's a lot of detail poured into that. But then also we get sort of a close-up. You only get sort of a peek at the human character model face, but already it's I mean, compared to the rendering quality of humans in, like, say, Fallout 4 and 76, which is just, it's very like PS360 era, you know, where it's just like normal maps with hard shadows and just kind of very Play-Doh-y looking. I mean, the skin shading here was a step forward, you know, the eye itself, all of that. Plus, I like the reflections on his helmet there. It's very subtle, but it's a nice touch. And also the terrain. They give us a peek at the planet's surface here. And that also has a unique look to it that's decidedly, I guess I can see some similarities to like some of their prior stuff, but like the way the distant terrain is rendered is a huge improvement. And I like the way the sort of the ground fog works along the horizon out there.
Yeah,
that looks really good as well. I mean, the whole thing is, the visual design is significantly more appealing, and I've enjoyed some of Bethesda's open world games in the past. They do tend to focus on more of a granular gameplay experience than a lot of other open world titles like Ubisoft stuff and even like GTA and all that. And seeing it with an increased level of fidelity and the freedom to explore these planets, I don't know, I find that really appealing in a way. Like it's kind of like trying to satisfy the promise maybe that, you know, we kind of got a taste of this with Mass Effect 1. And then Mass Effect kind of reeled it in and went very action-based and like super cover shooter heavy. And I feel like this might be moving in a different direction, but also not like a No Man's Sky direction where it's all like randomly generated stuff. And like I really feel like I'm hoping that these planets will have been designed with a purpose and will be interesting to explore. I'm
really wondering what their design brief is here looking at it, because this is not gameplay though. Like, let's be clear about this. This is just like them showing off what the engine is doing visually, and it's important to talk about that. But
well, they did say it was in-game.
Well, but it's not actual, like, we're not seeing somebody play the game, right?
No.
That's the thing.
That's what I mean. But it'd be interesting to see where they take this, because a part of making John was just contrasting the original Mass Effect and No Man's Sky. One is like fully procedural worlds with just like gameplay that's based on survival mechanics. Mass Effect 1 was going for this, you know, kind of personal, intimate level of like hub design for most of the game. And then these worlds you could land on were a little bit, you know, they weren't the highest fidelity of the time, but it was a promise of, you know, you go to places that were at least designed. That was the whole purpose. You go there and it's designed. I'm really curious if they're going to go for this is a large open world planet you land on, or if it's actually like, it's a smaller area on a planet, a landing zone, but it's like very bespoke and designed. I'm really curious what their design is there.
And I'd also be interested. So this trailer only shows a single person here, and I really hope they tap into that loneliness of space kind of thing. Like maybe there'll be, I'm sure there will be bustling cities and colonies and such, but like just going to a planet like this on your own and maybe discovering something. I mean, this, to me, like that was one of the things with some of these open world games these days, is like just walking across the terrain is often kind of boring in these games. Like the actual locomotion isn't fun, but like having, you know, actual planets to explore, flying to them, I feel like this could mix things up in a way that'll kind of mitigate that.
I agree.
So I don't know, there's a lot of promise here, and it's the most excited I've been for one of these Bethesda Game Studios titles since like, oh geez, I don't know. I mean, I was pretty hyped for Oblivion because I love
Oblivion. Everyone was pretty
that,
hyped for Oblivion. Yeah.
So that's, I don't know. We'll see. It's promising though.
So we're going to sort of deviate from the sort of heavy hitters, because there was a lot of titles in there that were more indie based in nature, and one in particular really stood out to you, right, John?
Yeah, the one I wanted to talk about, and one of the ones that impressed me the most at the show, is actually called Replaced. And it's, first look at it, it sort of reminds me of like the Flashback, Another World style of experience, where it's a bit more of a slow paced, you know, when you engage in combat, you sort of have to pull out your pistol and aim. But what I like about it is that it does have a similar aesthetic to, I guess, The Last Night, I guess it was called, which was shown many years ago, but hasn't yet emerged, and I am waiting to see that as well. But it's basically like 3D pixel art with a lot of like modern lighting techniques in there. And in fact, if you look at the ground construction in some scenes, it almost looks like voxels at points, and I'm wondering about that. Yep. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it had a very specific look to it.
But what I love is like, you just like, there's that part like right in front of the bus, and they get this super fluid like animation. The guy steps out into the scene, you actually see the rim lighting on the sprite itself, so they're actually lighting the individual sprites, I guess similar to the way Ori did it maybe, which was used a similar kind of technique, although that was actually like the highlights were drawn in there. But just the frames of animation they use, it has a lot of weight and impact to it. And again, it's just my thoughts are jumbled on this, but I just love all the different, like the mood that they've channeled here, and that mix of like really, really smooth sprite animation with tons of frames of animation, the dark shadows, some of the modern lighting techniques, the camera work, like the way they do some shaky cam moments at times where it's kind of tilting a little bit and moving around while engaged in combat. Like, I don't know, it's just a striking looking game, and I'm really like, it's now completely on my radar.
I think in terms of strategic stuff that this title kind of shows off is the breadth of genre and game size that this conference showed off, which is a pleasing aspect. We all like our AAA heavy hitters graphics and whatnot, but it's also, niche games with specific audiences are very important. And is this one of the day one Game Pass titles then, I'd imagine?
I think they pretty much all were, weren't they?
They basically all are, but it's just, it's pointing out the fact that Netflix style service where you have access not to just the AAA heavy hitters day one, but if you're someone who enjoys other type of games, it's a pretty, you're also covered by that. So that's really awesome, That's one
of the keys. I mean, that is actually truly a good benefit of Game Pass, I think, is that it does allow smaller games that people may not have tried previously to actually like stand a chance of catching someone's attention. And I think when we talked to Phil back last year, Rich, that was exactly the point that he was trying to make. It was like, this can actually help these types of games find an audience.
Absolutely.
So I really hope that it does help here, because like stuff like this is really, really interesting looking, and I'm glad that it's still possible, and I'm glad that these smaller games do actually get to take place on the world stage like this. It's such a big conference. It makes a strong impact for sure, and you can see from this one that it doesn't just have like, it's not just standard looking, if you know what I mean. Like it really has its own, it has a vibe, it has a style to it. So I'm really excited to see that.
Well, sort of adjacent to that conversation, I agree with you. Replaced really stood out as a visually distinctive game that kind of grabbed you, and you kind of wanted to You wanted to play it. You wanted to see how they pulled this off. But I think this is now a pretty good time to talk about the concept of presentation in this conference. Because, I mean, we've been talking so far for like, what, 3/4 of an hour on a relatively small selection of games. And they showed, 30 games during the entire presentation. And there were sections where we were looking at, not AAA titles, interesting games, I'd say, but it was just kind of like trailer footage, trailer, and nothing punctuated it. There was nothing about those games. There was nobody to tell you why is this game interesting? What is it doing? What sets it apart? And it just kind of appeared and disappeared like a conveyor belt, and almost like a commoditization of these games that I don't think did those games or the creators any favors. And it's actually that's one of the lessons we learned, curiously enough, on YouTube, is that if you aren't sort of providing any kind of story or commentary and you just put footage up, people kind of tune out. They just don't engage with it. I was tuning out of some of the stuff that was happening there. I wasn't really seeing the point of it. The only message I was getting from this conveyor belt of stuff was, okay, this is on Game Pass, this is on Game Pass, this is on Game Pass. And on the one hand, that's brilliant in selling Game Pass, but on the other hand, there are some games here that I think that were sold short in terms of what they're actually going to deliver as a user experience, and those were the parts of the presentation that fell flat for me.
Yeah.
And I think it's safe to say, it's constructive criticism here, because I honestly think, if you think about what, for example, what Jeff Keighley's doing with Summer Game Fest, I would venture to suggest that there is more source content here than in probably the entirety of Jeff's Summer Festival. But it's just, as I said, the conveyor belt, game in, game out. And you look at what Forza Horizon 5 was doing. Yes, it was a game that made a big visual impact, but I also think the reason why we stuck it to number one of our discussion points here is that we had the developer there front and center telling us about it, telling us what they're doing, why we should be excited about it. And I realized that they had a lot to put into 90 minutes. But I'd say that there's a lot of unsung heroes within this stuff, and a lot of games that we're not talking about that maybe we would have been talking about if we'd had a bit more context.
I agree.
I feel like case in point here is it's on the list to talk about, but I should bring it up here. It's like Psychonauts 2, right? They showed a nice trailer. It was a cool trailer, but if you're not familiar with what Psychonauts is, you'd be like, okay, whatever, that's just another game in the lineup. But at E3 in 2019, I actually got to see an extended demo with Tim Schafer talking and playing the game, and what they showed there was so engaging, and just the combination of the writing, the crazy level design, and just the way it played out, it was absolutely awesome. And while this trailer is fine, I know that because I saw that demo and I got to hear Tim's enthusiasm for what they were showing, that really sold me on okay, they get this, they're gonna make something amazing here. And so in that sense, a game like that, I feel like it's strong enough to have deserved a larger spot here. Bring out Tim Schafer. He's a funny dude, and he can definitely handle an audience. I feel like putting him up there talking about this game, just showing the gameplay, would have made a really strong impact, and I think you would have seen more people talking about that. Or something like Redfall at the end. I guess clearly it's not ready to be shown, right? But Arcane, I mean, that's, of the last 10 years, they've become one of my absolute favorite developers. I mean, Arcane Studios Austin made Prey, which was, again, that's such a great game. It was hugely overlooked, but man, is it a good game. I've been raving about that for years. And then they show this, and it's okay, I have every expectation it's going to be an amazing game, because that's what these guys do. But it's just a CGI trailer. Yeah. And it's really hard to get psyched about the thing when all you see is this concept CGI trailer, and it's just, I don't know, I feel like we could have done without some of the CGI teasers and maybe delved more into what the games themselves were, because there's so much here that deserves that. And we didn't quite get enough.
I think another example is A Plague Tale Requiem, which, if we think about the first game, it came out of nowhere. It blew us away.
Sure did.
It's an absolutely phenomenal game. The technology behind it is phenomenal.
It's very cool.
The trailer that we saw, I think it was really promising. Yes, it was in-engine, but it is from a developer that we know can deliver. I think it's going to be a great game. But, we just got that sort of engine cinematic. And I guess if you want to announce the arrival of a sequel to A Plague Tale, then job done. But it just really comes across as a missed opportunity. And it's the same with a lot of the titles in here, where I'm kind of none the wiser. I just know they're going to be on Game Pass, which is fair enough. But I just think that, I know it's tough. They've got 90 minutes to produce, to cram all of this stuff in. And secondly, the whole COVID-19 situation makes the concept of doing a traditional or even a kind of more ambitious presentation a lot more challenging.
Well, this is what they've always done, though, so it's not that different, right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, but then again, some might say that this formula must be working for them if if they keep on persisting with it. But we've talked about it before, John, the trailerification of E3. Where it is just kind of like, just random stuff that arrives on screen. You don't really end up any the wiser about it.
That's what we're really missing this time. Like, whenever we go to E3, like, you get more extended demos of stuff to talk about because they actually show the games being played. And that makes such a huge difference in terms of helping you understand, like, what the game is. And I feel like that's a missed opportunity here. For like, Microsoft has enough games in this list where they could say have like during the E3 week, have like a daily show where they like go more in depth on a number of these games.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the Redfall thing, what I was left with was the concept of a co-op shooter.
That's what I thought.
But the crucial thing is that I wasn't given any kind of indication of what makes this an arcane game, which for me is crucial.
I agree.
That's the whole point of this studio is something special. They do things differently. This looks like a co-op shooter based on the CG trailer, but what makes it an arcane game? That's the question for me. Okay, well look, let's move on. Something which we've all been waiting many months for, hugely excited about it. We saw it. There are rays being traced.
Woo!
Alex, Doom Eternal.
Yeah, this one looks like the ray trace reflections they demoed at the kind of announcement of the RTX 3080 Ti and 3070 Ti a while back, brought to console and Xbox Series X. It's also going to be coming out for PlayStation 5 as far as I know. And high resolution ray tracing in id Tech. I think that's just awesome. We'll have to wait and see to how it performs, but I imagine it's going to be very similar to their other titles where it's dynamic resolution and a really good 60. So there's just, other than that, there's not too much to say about it.
120 was also
120,
offered the performance mode, so it's nice. They have a 120 hertz mode or a 60 FPS mode, and I have every confidence in saying that I think it's going to hit that target relatively easily.
Easy.
These guys are great with this stuff. And also, they said the game's also now coming to Game Pass, and I'm wondering if that includes, probably not, but it has those 2 DLC packs that are really good. The Ancient Gods 1 and 2, so which is definitely worth checking out. So when that hits, I would like to revisit Doom Eternal for sure at some point, just to examine what they have in there, because
that's at the end of the month, right? June 29th, I believe they announced.
Yeah, maybe so.
Soon enough, and we'll have probably coverage on that right away.
Also coming to Game Pass, the original Rage. So if you like static light maps everywhere, if you like mega texture,
and if you like John Goodman being in the game for about 20 minutes, this is the game for you.
Yeah.
Okay, look, well, we're kind of sort of reaching the point where we should wrap things up then. Well, the key thing has been the concept that Microsoft is in trouble in terms of first-party exclusives and system selling software. But I think,
that's going away. That's not a problem anymore.
It's not a problem, no.
Just the Bethesda tie-up solved that particular issue.
Yeah.
And, and again, can't really overstress this. they are all in on Game Pass. I mean, the commitment to that particular service that was summed up in that presentation was just phenomenal. Any final thoughts from you, Alex?
I wish we did see more of Halo Infinite single player in the form of a demo gameplay, because the problem wasn't necessarily the cutscene graphics last time around. Yes, I didn't like the materials, but it was all about the way the game looked when you were playing it. And that was something that I think would have been really key to show, both running on either a PC or an Xbox Series X. That's what I really wanted. And oddly enough, they showed off, they did show off Age of Empires, and I wasn't excited. I don't know how you show off an RTS game at a conference like this, but I'm surprised that it just didn't look as interesting or as dynamic or any of these other things that I expected it to look like necessarily. I'm going to want to cover it when it does come out, but this wasn't the most impressive showing I've ever seen of an Age of Empires game, especially after the remastering of 2 and 3, so whatever.
Well, let's not end this on a downer. I think this was a pretty awesome conference overall.
Yep.
I just think there were some presentational issues that were sort of detrimental to the quality of the games, but we did get to see a lot of games. We did get to see this phenomenal commitment to Game Pass, and just in terms of the momentum behind Xbox, I think it's pretty awesome. I think there's so much going on there.
Wait, you forgot one thing, Rich. A really important one. The mini fridge.
Oh, yes.
I love this trailer because it evokes the imagery that they used to present the original Xbox. I think it's a genius move. And,
yes.
And it was just phenomenal to see that trailer play out. And I don't know. I wasn't really concerned about the mini fridge, but now I want it to be a really good product. This is a crazy thing. And the mini fridge, awesome. I think another thing which I think deserves praise. I mean, we've been talking about the nonsense of CG trailers, the complete void of information, and a lot of this stuff does. It's kind of just a kind of bizarre way to announce Game X is coming out. And then we had that Outer Worlds 2 trailer, which
forgot about that.
Basically just hammered the exact same point down, and kind of was just really funny.
I do wonder
but almost kind of incongruous within the conference that's doing all of these things.
Yeah, you look at the Contraband trailer and you look at the Redfall trailer, and then you watch this one, you're like, oh, this is just taking the piss with that. It's like, very funny.
But at the same time, it was nice to get a few laughs out of that. But overall, I think it was a very positive showing. And the thing about these things is that there's so much expectation going in, it can never fully satisfy everyone. But it seemed like a lot of people were really enjoying what they saw, and certainly we're going to have tons to talk about going forward. But I'd like to thank both of you for joining me on this one. So thanks, John.
Of course, and this is just the beginning. We have a lot of more discussions coming up this week.
Absolutely. And Alex, what can I say? Thank you.
Of course, Rich. It's a pleasure.
It's a very smouldering look you're giving me. There's a certain subtext building here.
It's steaming in the background.
As always, please do like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed the content. Ring the bell for instant notifications whenever Digital Foundry...
Did you say instant?
Instant.
It is instant. Well, theoretically it's instant, depending on whether Google fancies living up to its implementation there. And of course, DF Patreon. Support the team, get access to a whole bunch of extras, behind the scenes content. You can support DF Retro more thoroughly to do some awesome stuff there. You can speak to us on our Discord, we're there. But that's all from us for now. Thanks for watching.